Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Today we have with us Aditi Jain, a young poet from New Delhi who's come out with her first poetry collection called Chaotic Cosmos Vol.1. She's all of 19 and she writes way beyond her age and deals with questions dealing with emotions, the turmoil within the human soul, the universe at large, and many more questions. It's a very interesting collection of poems, and I had a lot of fun reading it, and I'm sure you'd enjoy this interview as well. So let's dive right in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Kitabi Karwan podcast. Hello, Aditi, welcome. And so this is something very new for the podcast because we generally don't have poets on the podcast because very frankly I don't read a lot of poetry. I do read poetry but not a lot of it, but and most of the people that I talk to are authors, both fiction non-fiction. But it was so wonderful to read your work. I am not kidding, it's absolutely delightful to see the kind of lighting that a 19-year-old or an 18-year-old can bring about. And I'm sure my audience would want to know a lot more about you. But before we get into this is a question that I have to ask practically every Kitabi Karwan podcast guest ever, because it started off as a gag, but eventually it just turned into one of the questions which listeners love the most. But so okay, tell us something about you which people generally won't know from your public profile. You know how everyone has an internet profile about who they are and what are the things that are important to them. But there are parts of you that are not visible to the world, right? So what is it about you that we might not get if we Google Aditi Jain or look up your Insta or Facebook?
I think they'll say that I was a very public oriented person in school, that I
Right.
was used to getting on stages and I used to being on the stage and speaking on the mic. But
Right.
what they won't know is that there was a lot that used to go behind that. Because I think for a large part of my life, in my school life, I didn't feel like I belonged there because I was
Huh?
even after hundreds of competitions, basics inter-school competitions or inter-house competitions, I always felt like, you know, that particular nervousness that a first timer feels. So I
Mhm.
think as public as I seem, I'm not. I mean, people would call me an extrovert if they would talk to my friends, but I really don't think I am one.
That's interesting. And that just gives you so much insight into how young minds work, or in fact, minds in general work. Young is just not an adjective for it, because it's your perception of yourself which at the end of it reflects your true reality as opposed to what others think of you, because that's just what the world sees because you let them see that. But
Sure.
before we get all too serious, uh, I read your work and I was absolutely taken aback by how charming and beautiful that your writing is. It's something that particularly stood out for me was your language that usage was rather, I wouldn't go as far as calling it archaic, but it was a lot more prim, proper, and along the lines of what a very formal English education would reflect, as opposed to a more casual form of writing. So, was this a conscious decision that you make, or was it just a result of, say, or maybe a teacher or your parents or something that influenced how your work goes about?
I think it was a mix of both because um, I'll tell you what. Every time I used to read, just a line or two from Shakespeare's sonnets or anything for that matter, I
Mm-hmm.
was always inclined towards that kind of poetry a lot more than I would be towards, say, someone like Rupi Kaur or
Mm-hmm.
Nikita Gale. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so of course, what they do is excellent.
Right.
I probably can't even imagine being in their place. But for me, my personal inclination, my personal preference would always towards, usage of the archaic English or,
Mm-hmm.
sticking to rhyme. Because as far, as many poems as I've read from that, I've learned that, they were always giving some kind of importance to rhyming, even though I
Right.
understand that prose poetry is a thing now. So I
Right.
understand that it's not a necessity. And, a lot of
Right.
my poems, even, they don't rhyme as well because in
Mm-hmm.
those particular poems, I didn't feel the need to, just stick to the rhyming
Right.
scheme or create a rhyming scheme, which would hamper my meaning or the essence of what I was trying to say.
Right.
So it was conscious in the sense that when I started writing, seriously, not about burgers. So in that, during that phase, I actually wanted to see myself write something that I would personally appreciate as a third person,
Right.
something that would count for respect in my mind. Of
Right.
course, again, a lot of my friends or people I talk to confuse this with the fact that I probably have some sort of disrespect or a low opinion of people who write prose poetry, or who don't stick
Right.
to the rhyming scheme, or who don't use trim and proper English, as you said. But that's
Right.
not true. I love their work too. What they say is pure feelings, pure sentiment
Right.
in its rawest form. But
Right.
that's just my personal preference. That's
Right.
all.
And that makes sense. I mean, to each their own, and I think there is no like comparison between the two. But
Yeah.
something that I particularly noticed about your work also, and that you mentioned in your acknowledgement, that you a lot of your work, particularly the dedication to the Zen circle, and you talk a lot about how your mother was played a key role in your understanding of spirituality and your connect with nature. So what was the driving force behind this? I don't know, was there something that was this just plain inspiration from the world at large that drove you to put down your words, or was it a conscious choice that you made, that maybe this seems like an interesting area, that I mean, I'm not saying that you manipulated your choice, but rather that you were interested in, it just seemed like an interesting area to write on, or was it just more of a natural flow among things, that's
I
literally
think
what your thoughts were pouring out with?
I think it was very organic for me. So
Right.
if I were to break down the entire story of I remember the exact moments that I was having in when I was writing a particular poem. So I
Right.
remember how I was feeling, or what prompted that particular poem for me. Was it something my brother said, or was it something that I saw or heard my mother talk to someone else about? So I remember those things.
Hmm.
But then again, if I were to break down those entire moments and
Right.
give you walk you step by step through them, I think that would be unfair for the people that prompted those moments
Right.
for me. For example,
Right.
my mother or my brother or even my father
Right.
at times. So I wouldn't want to do that. But yes, of course, there was a time in my family life when my mother started reading the book The Secret, you know,
Mhm.
and I mentioned this in my acknowledgements. There was this doctor who
Mhm.
treated me for various various diseases or something. So
Right.
I used to talk to him about a lot of things, not about my personal or individual life. No, I used to ask him questions about why people behave like they do, or why is it
Right.
that people undergo things that they don't expect. Just simple questions about life at
Mhm.
large. A 15-year curious kid would want to ask about.
Right.
So I think a mix of my mother's newfound inspiration from my doctor's suggestions of the book,
Right.
and the books that my doctor used to give me. This was a
Right.
family doctor, right? So he used to
Right.
suggest books to me. He would gift me books whenever I scored, good.
Right.
He gave me a book after my 10th board results, my 12th board results. So I think when I used to hear them talk about these things, when my mother used to talk about why, for example, the importance of perseverance, or for the example of staying positive, or finding a silver lining in everything. So in those particular conversations, I can't really give an example on the spot of any one
Mhm. It's
conversation,
okay.
but yeah. So those conversations and the discussions or the deliberations that I would hold with my brother after them at 2 a.m. in the night. So those were the moments, and then I would walk back to my own room, find my notebook, just a random pen and paper, and
Right.
scribble down whatever I thought. And
Right.
somehow they started turning into poems, which I think
Right.
was really satisfying for me at first. This was all before I started thinking about formally publishing a book. It was
Right.
just a fantasy.
Mhm. Mhm. So, I mean, that's a very interesting answer, to be honest, because, and uh that's quite reflective in people's work, and even yours for that matter, that as to how their work comes about. Like, I mean, I had the opportunity to talk to Anuja Chauhan a while back, and as much as I love her work, one of the things that stands out in her work for me is about how natural the people seem, and how real life her characters are. And she mentioned that a lot of her characters are just based on people she knows, right? And a lot of the incidents she writes about are just from her own life, or like inspired from those things. And I guess that makes for the best kind of literature, or poems for that matter, because it's just true embodiment of what's out there. So, but I must ask this, because this is something that I mean, I get asked a lot at my age as well, because I'm 25 right now. I'll turn 26 in a month. Actually, no, in 20 days. But the point is that, so because of the fact that you're talking about a lot of metaphysical things and things that are really nice to talk about, but at the end of it, you do remain 19, and I do remain 26, and it feels odd for a person who's say 50 or 60 to be hearing about, I don't know, say arrogance, or like about being lost about things from a younger soul. So do you think, how do you deal with such criticism? It's actually beyond what you think. It's just because there would be time when someone would be like, oh, she's too young to be talking about this, and not in a way that you shouldn't talk about it, but just that what would she know about this, because she's just yet to experience it. And to an extent, I guess that would be fair, to the extent that
Fair.
a lot of the troubles that you faced would be unique to your age set, but not difficult as opposed to what an more adult life would be. But that doesn't take away from the crux of that problem, right? Anyway,
Correct.
how do
But
you
yeah,
deal with it?
I think the criticism that you're talking about is the one where people come up to me and they say, there have been certain people who, actually in a very diluted manner, all they wanted to say was, it's a very condescending thing for a person who is 19 or 18 to write about
Okay.
stuff that they haven't even faced yet. So,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, it's fair for them to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
I can't really. It's actually correct. So
Mm-hmm.
I am 19 and I published that book when I was 19. So it makes sense for them to say that. But again, I think since I said this in one of my previous interviews as well on Instagram, that I always felt like, considering that I have a very young age when I'm writing, and that I have the insights into lives of people who have been through a lot. For example, my brother or my mother,
Mm-hmm.
without going into their personal experiences, or even my father. I think those insights were the reason I was writing half of the stuff that I was.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to take credit for the inspirations for my own life, because of course there were some inspirations that came from my own life, from people I knew, or from things I went through, or just circumstances that I faced. But a lot of it was just from the lessons that my brother learned along his way,
Right.
or my parents learned along their own ways. And those
Right.
were the experiences that we used to share with me as stories. My mother would tell me stories of her early life in her 30s or in her early
Mm-hmm.
40s. So I think a lot of those things were what, like you said, it's with Anuja Chauhan as well. What she writes is largely derived from her own personal experiences.
Right.
So I always felt like no poetry or no particular piece of fiction can ever be purely fiction.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot be. There's always some sort of inspiration from one's own life,
Mm-hmm.
except for scientific fiction or, fantasies, Harry
Right.
Potter or something.
Right.
But yeah. So if you ask me what's my way of dealing with that kind of criticism, I'll be very honest, I don't think I found any particular way yet, because it
Okay.
does hurt.
Right.
Okay, so what I try to do is I talk it out with my
Mm-hmm.
mother,
Mm-hmm.
who makes me find the silver lining.
Mm-hmm.
That, maybe they are just saying what they're saying because they don't know your story, or because they haven't talked to you about it. They just came, walked up to you, made an uninformed remark, and that was it for them.
Right.
So, you have to look at it that way, that that's an uninformed remark
Mm-hmm.
about something that they probably wish for themselves too. At times
Right.
that happens.
Right.
There was this instinct. I don't want to take names. Of course, I won't take names. But there were people who, messaged me, we want you on our poetry page, would you do an Instagram live with us? I said, yes, of course. Just give me time. Let me get done with my work and I'll let you know. So before I could let them know that I can be on their page and I have this particular day free for them, I saw one of their Instagram lives with another person and they're talking about my book. Or why is this person talking about stuff that hasn't even been through? Or why does a book, seem like it does? Because
Right.
there were certain people who had the courage to say it. So I think that's okay. It's their opinion. I can't stop them.
Right. No, that's fair to an extent, and I mean, okay, it's really reflective in your acknowledgements and your dedications that obviously you value your family a lot, and their experiences were what drove the writing of this book. And uh, I think it's also unfair for you to be so hard on yourself and say that it's factual when people say so, because personally, from what I understand, it's a very simple way of looking at things, that like say a child who's 10 and wants a chocolate and is trying to save pocket money to get that chocolate, and the person who's like say 30 and trying to save money to buy a house, are largely in the same boat. The quantum of their problem might be different, but it's the feeling is largely the same, right? So I know, and the reason I ask this question is because I have faced that as well, and I think a lot of people who are younger in age and talk about serious things face this, because uh right,
You
that
know,
doesn't take
uh,
away from their opinion, but yeah, sure, sorry, I'm so sorry, please continue.
no, that's okay. So like you said, it's not. It wasn't even just about my writing.
Mhm.
I had certain friends in my life, one or two, with whom I used to have these conversations, and they appreciated my feedback on whatever they
Mhm.
were asking me about, or they appreciated me talking them through things, or even my juniors for some matter. But then again, there were some people who I thought wouldn't care about, or who I thought wouldn't talk behind my back about things that I was saying. But then yes, there were some people who, it wasn't always just about my writing. The criticism that came into, after I released the book, it was something that I already, heard people talk about in my personal life beyond my writing, beyond Chaotic Cosmos. So yeah,
Mhm.
I had a page of Chaotic Cosmos. Not a
Oh,
lot of
okay.
people know that.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
didn't know
I had
that.
an
I'm sorry.
Instagram.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So now I'll just pivot a bit away from the book, and because I largely feel that it's very difficult to capture the emotions of your book into a podcast. Because your collection of poems are, they've actually made me think a lot more about things than just leave me with that feeling of being satisfied at the end. Like, I was very impressed by it, but my mind's spinning about those questions that you've asked, because a lot of them, and in fact I'm happen to be reading another collection of short stories uh, by this author called Meera Sethi. She's a Pakistani TV actress and a
Mhm.
journalist as well, based out of California. And she's particularly been writing short stories which also have such uh, imperfect endings, if I can put it that way, and that kind of just that's been my zone right now. But I would like to pivot to your writing process a little bit more. So
Yeah.
uh, so do you have like a mechanical process of writing? And like, I ask this without any judgment, because for a lot of people writing is just about discipline and perseverance and like sitting down and allocating time for writing, while a lot of people, and you did mention a bit of it, that like you talk to someone at 2 in the night, your brother, your mother, and come back and pen those things down, like a more organic let flow kind of thing. Which method of these two works for you?
I think so. For particularly for Chaotic Cosmos, it was definitely just an organic thing. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't, collect those poems over 1 week or over a defined period of time. It didn't happen that way. These are poems. Some are from 10th grade, some are from just a month before, submitting my manuscript. So it was
Mm-hmm.
that diverse in that sense. But when you talk about discipline or some sort of mechanic way of writing, I think I've seen myself develop that when I'm writing articles. So if I'm
Okay.
trying to submit something to a magazine, if it's an analytical article or talk about sexism in Bollywood or basic feminism issues in an Indian household, if I'm trying to write about that, articles submitting to a magazines or different newspapers or things like that, I think I would need some sort of discipline because that's more towards my career path in a very defined manner, in a conventional manner, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I if I think I haven't told a lot of people about it, but I am thinking about writing a book. I have the
Mm-hmm.
idea. I have some sort of writing process started on it. But then again, I told myself that maybe I'll need some sort of discipline. I fixed a time schedule for myself that I'll
Right.
get to it on at 10 p.m. and I won't get up before 12 a.m. But that
Right.
didn't work for me. It
Right.
didn't, because when I told myself I have to sit on the chair and just get myself on the laptop and start writing, I think I was writing, but it wasn't satisfactory.
Right.
It wasn't the kind of thing that I would want to read about myself or from myself.
Right.
So again, I think it works differently for different people, and as long as it's working for the writers, it's okay. There has to be no judgment in it, like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's quite an interesting and honest answer. Thank you for that. Because not a lot of people would like to admit that disciplinary forms of writing doesn't work for them. But so that brings me to another thing that I wanted to ask you. So a lot of people have quirky things about their own writing processes, right? Like, I mean, they have ways of like finding out what's wrong with it, or what's right with it, what's working, what's not, or something along those lines. What is it that works for you? What are the quirks that you involve with your writing process, or like reviewing process for that matter?
Are you asking me particularly about my poems or any piece of writing that I
Particularly
put
your
together?
poems. Let's talk about your poems particularly. Like,
Okay, so for my poems, I think after I'm done writing, just a simple pen pencil. I usually try to write with my pencil because I have to make a lot of cuttings.
right.
So when I am writing, when I'm done writing with my pencil in the first go, I'm very shy about it, even with myself, let alone other persons. Yeah, because I
Okay.
feel like, I mean, I'm scared of getting cringed out about it, in a way, because I'm always scared that, I might feel stupid about what I'm writing 2-3 days
Okay.
later. So what
Okay.
I try to do is, once I'm done with the poem, I just read it again
Mhm.
immediately without a second thought. I read it again, and I actually keep reading the poems, the lines, verse after verse, just to see if I'm going correct, or if I'm, skipping words, because it happens with me a lot. I'm reading and thinking in my mind, but somehow I miss words when I'm writing. It happens
Right.
when I'm on typing or when I'm writing. It happens either way. So I read the poem immediately without a second thought, and then I just leave it. I forget
Mhm.
about it.
Mhm.
If it's on my phone, if because a lot of times I'm just typing my poems when I'm on my way and I don't have a pen or pencil.
Mhm.
So if it's in my notes, I just log that particular note and I just forget about it for a couple of
Mhm.
days, and
Mhm.
then um, suddenly some other night I'll just remember, oh yes, I wrote something that day.
Mhm.
There's something written from the other day, so I'll just revisit it
Right.
then. So if I
Right.
like it, I think I'll be okay with it. And by like, I mean feeling like there's some sort of sincere sentiment behind what has come out.
Right.
Correct?
Right.
Yeah. So that's how I usually do it.
Right. So again, and now the next question is something that I'm going to steal from the recent Friends reunion because I picked it up there, and this was something that I was very fascinated by. So once you were published, like your book was published in March, I think, March or
Yeah.
April, right? So
March.
it's been a good 2-3 months after it. Have you ever sat down and reread your work, like like the
So,
entirety of your collection, right? Why
right.
is there a
So,
reason? Have you particularly avoided it, or is just that you haven't found the time?
no, no, no. I had a lot of time on my plate. It
Right,
wasn't about the time. Um, I'll tell you, I got my books, my own author copies, just a few weeks ago.
right,
So when they did arrive, before they arrived, I had this idea that I would read the book the same day, the same second I got them. I just
right,
tear open the package and I get to reading it. But when they did arrive, I just flipped through the pages to see the paper quality, and then I didn't read a single piece of my work. So my mother had that book and my brother had that book, and my father was upstairs, so he wasn't reading it back then. But I told all three of them that don't ask me for any meaning. Don't come and ask me what does this mean, or
right,
why did you write this, or is it about me, or maybe you'll know when it's about you, but don't ask me.
right,
I don't want to explain. I feel awkward when I have to explain what I wrote because, like I said, I was shy with myself, let alone with other people, even if it's
right,
family.
right,
So I didn't have the courage, so to say, to read my work again. I thought that I might feel discouraged by it, and I didn't want that for myself, not at this time. Maybe I will read it some other day, months from now.
Speaking as someone who's not related to you and has read the work, I think you should read it again. You definitely won't be discouraged by it. For sure, that is something I can guarantee. It was a really nice collection of poems. But I would. So again, now I'd like to pivot to another spectrum of things, which I like to believe that almost all writers and with the poets, prose, fiction, non-fiction, whatever they write, they are more often than not voracious readers. I think reading is one thing that really helps the craft of writing. And regardless of whether it helps the craft of writing or not, reading is just one of the most brilliant activities out there, as it's evident from my page. But uh, so, can you do tell us about yourself as a reader? Like, what are the books you kind of like to read, and when did you start reading? What made you, uh, fall in
Okay,
love
so
with books?
I'll tell you. It's actually a fun story. I really tried myself on this one.
Mm.
There was this thing in my school. We used to call it the good reading thing. It was
Okay,
just good reading. It was a sort of concept in Balbhati in my school.
right,
So what they used to do is, when we were in Mod 1 or Mod 2, we had a set number of books that we had to read, and the teacher would test us on them. It was a voluntary thing. It wasn't
right,
compulsory for every kid to do. So when
right,
my mother heard about it, when she admitted me in the school, and when she tells me the story, so when the headmistress told her that there's this thing called good reading, because my mother was hell bent on getting me a good education,
right.
she was so determined to make me a proper academic person. She wanted
Mm.
me to have an academic life. You
Mhm.
know, uh, she kind of wanted those things for me. So even for my brother, in fact. So I think that's how I started reading in kindergarten, because my mother would want me to, just go for the good reading thing. So if you can see, there's this Bruno book behind me on my shelf. That was
Right,
one of the first books that I was reading. it had just one line on a page, A and the. That was all there was on one page.
Right.
So that's how I started reading. And then there was this, why I continued with the good reading concept, because after a time my mother had given up on me if I was getting lazy, as kids generally do, because reading at their age sometimes feels like a tedious work.
Right.
The peers call it a tedious task. So I think I was in fifth grade, and it was on my annual day that my parents saw this one girl get up on stage and get awarded for being a good reader for 14 years, which is from first to 12th and 1 and 1. So we were driving back home. I was a dancer back then. I was in a dance performance on annual day. So we were driving back home, and I heard my parents talk about that girl. And they mentioned, they turned back to me and they said, if you have that record up till now, it had been 4, 5, 6 years, I think. So wouldn't it be great if you could do that too? It's just 5, 7 years left. So I think that day, that moment stuck in my head. Sometimes
Right.
that happens. Certain moments just stick in your memory. They don't
Right.
leave. So till this date, I remember that day, my parents talking about that girl or getting 14 years of good reader. So for my entire school life, until I really, just started being a reader in its truest sense, because until I really fell in love, which was I think in sixth, seventh grade. That was what drove me to just keep reading, because I wanted
Right.
to see me getting a full 14-year Good Readers Award. So now that's done. I did get it. I didn't get awarded the particular award because of COVID, because my school shut down. But yeah, so, and the kind of books I like, I think um, I can do with any sort of book apart from science fiction or fantasies for that matter. I'm really sorry for saying this. I haven't read a single Harry Potter book. I tried to read
Oh.
Sorcerer's Stone, but I think
It's okay.
I had to drop. I mean, I couldn't get my head to it. I just couldn't. I enjoyed the movies. I did.
Right.
And in fact, I saw all of the movies just last year because I was
Right.
so bored during the pandemic.
Right.
But yeah, those are the kind of books I can't really get into. But apart from that, I think I can try any sort of book you want.
Yeah, that's interesting. And again, very bold to admit that you don't like Harry Potter. I mean, as much as I
I
love Harry
tried
Potter.
to
No, no,
Twitter.
it's perfectly fine. No, no, I'm not. Again, that's not a judgment. I mean, I maybe like a few years ago when I was maybe younger, I would have like I don't know, be paying for your blood and like calling you out, like down with such readers and
Yeah,
everything. But no, I personally think it's fine. I mean, every to each their own. I don't think it's something that has to be read by people. It just what book appeals to you and what doesn't is fine. That's perfectly fine that you haven't read it. But that's quite it's quite a very interesting thing that you mentioned that your drift into reading was just earlier not particularly inspired from books in itself, but like from other factors, and then eventually grew into it. And as blasphemous as it is for me to ask this, I will try to frame it another way. uh, was there a book which actually ever stood out for you, particularly as a person, or something that you keep going back to, right? Or a book that's just very close to your heart, book or books for that matter?
I think my comfort book in that sense would be by Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Morrie. All
No,
of his books for that matter, but Tuesdays with Morrie is just something I can't get enough of. When
right,
like my mother appreciates The Secret, I
mhm,
appreciate the Tuesdays with Morrie.
right,
There's just something about the book that makes me want to write another book just like that. I hope for a day, when someone will walk up to me and tell them that they like my book, if I
mhm,
write one someday,
mhm,
the way I like Tuesdays with Morrie. There's just something magical about the way he penned down his entire journey with this professor, and the
mhm.
last classes. Have you read that book?
I have.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's just amazing. I can't
In
get enough of it.
in fact, when you were mentioning that you want to write something similar to it, I just kept thinking that it'll just be like at least 20-30 years from now, because you'll have to have a college professor who'll
Yeah.
get old, and then you have to go to him or her during their dying years. But sorry, but yeah, like that's a
Yeah.
very sweet thought to go back to, I guess. And so Aditi, I'm just coming to the end of this podcast, but what are your future plans? Are you still writing? Are you still planning on writing more? Because your book titled uh, Chaotic Cosmos Vol.1, so I'm assuming there's a Volume 2 coming up. But
Yeah. So
are there like
I
other
think,
kind of things that you want to write as well? About?
yeah. So my tentative plan would be in. I don't want it to sound so mechanical by using a word like plan, but my hope is that I just write a fiction before I get to volume 2. I do have certain concrete ideas for volume two because
Mm-hmm.
I want it to be in a different way from volume one.
Mm-hmm.
Although the themes would kind of be similar, but before that, I do want to start with a fiction book, sincerely and get to it, really get to it. Apart from that, I'm not writing just for creative writing. I want to pursue writing as a career too. So I'm hoping to get into professional writing as well, as a journalist or a freelance
Right.
writer. I'm looking into that, but before that, currently, if
Mm-hmm.
you ask me today, my priority has somehow become my academics. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I I don't want to miss this time because for a long time in my school, even though my grades were always okay, but they weren't my priority. I was
Right.
always doing extracurriculars or reading books or focusing on other things. But
Right.
for now, I think I want to get to my graduation, get into an MA perfect school,
Mm-hmm.
the school of my dreams. But yeah, so for now, that's it. But yes, there is a volume two, and there's a lot more I hope comes my way. Yeah.
Right. That's quite fascinating. And if I may just offer a piece of unsolicited advice, please continue writing. You have an absolute knack for it. And I don't think the next few years of graduation should be what you should wait for before you write your next work. At least as a reader, I wouldn't hope for that. But
Thank
uh,
you so much.
on that note, that brings us to the end of this podcast. Thank you so much for talking to us. Your poetry collection's absolutely lovely. I mean, I'm a huge fan. Like, I actually genuinely enjoyed it, and it's something that's, as I mentioned, it got me to think about things which I haven't thought about for a while, and I think that's the best compliment I can probably offer to a poet.
Thank
So,
you so much.
thank you
It
for
means a
joining
lot to
us.
me. 19-year old listening to
Yeah.
this from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed that podcast, please subscribe to the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to our channel. Like this video, share, subscribe, and spread the word among all your friends and all fellow bibliophiles who you think might enjoy such further conversation with authors or poets about their thoughts and their writing process. Also, check us out on Instagram at the rate Kitabi Karwan, where we post about books, our experiences reading them, talking to authors, having live sessions, and a lot more stuff which any bibliophile would enjoy. Thank you so much for listening.